This is the basic blueprint of how to be ready for a great relationship. You become fully and freely yourself. But what some of us do is wait for the relationship to do that for us. Like if we could just find the perfect person or say just the right thing, everything would finally fit. And because doing this comes from a place full of holes, basically, big undeveloped parts of your identity and your happiness, I call this, like trying to get your identity from somebody else, emotional spackle. You know, spackle, it's that paste that you rub onto old nail holes on the wall before you paint it. So emotional spackle. In a relationship, you try to fill in what's missing in the other person for you and the way they feel about you in your own mind. And in this way, you craft a public image of your relationship. Like you tell yourself, it's fine, I don't see any holes, and you show everybody else, see, it's great. So I want to talk about that. My letter today is from a woman I'll call Amy, and she writes, "Dear crappy childhood fairy, 5 years ago, I got out of a relationship with a man who I'll call Luke, who I had dated for 7 years. It ultimately ended because he cheated and gaslit me for 6 months, leading up to my discovery of what happened. But that was just the tipping point on the iceberg." That's a good mixed metaphor. Tipping point on the iceberg. "I had known that I liked the same gender since I was 11, but was in the closet. When he pursued me hard at age 17, I dated him because I had never been in a relationship before. I was young and dumb. It's important to note that from the age of 11 to this point, and truthfully for most of the relationship with him, I had been limerent for a female classmate. I'm certain it was mutual, but because we were both in the closet, I never pursued it. Long story short, my relationship with Luke ended up being codependent, but the physical aspect was always difficult on my end. And the secretive limerent behavior had led to other toxic problems within the relationship. He knew I liked women, but didn't take it seriously. When that relationship ended, I was hurt by his actions, but I can't say I didn't deserve it. I did a lot of self-work to redefine my identity without him and work on my sense of empathy and reflect on the relationship, and can say I fully moved on by about 4 years ago. I wasn't limerent and I was available for love." Hear what you're saying. Okay. "I finally started dating again a couple years ago when I was 28. And this is where I'm taking out the fairy pencil to start circling things I want to come back to on a second reading. But let's go all the way through Amy's letter and see what she's going through, and I'll see if I can help. Okay. She says, at age 28, a couple years ago, she met a woman on an online dating app. She says, "We'd been talking for a few weeks, and I was excited to tell my friends about this journey, so I built her into my coming out story. She was exactly my type physically. I didn't know what I was looking for personality-wise at the time, besides down to earth. I ended up very attracted to her blunt demeanor, her sarcastic dry humor, and bonded over our love for lesbian pop culture, TV shows, games, etc. And we had talked every day for 6 weeks, and the communication was easy and banterful." I love that word, banterful. "But admittedly, I felt she had some walls up when it came to deeper topics, with the use of deflective sarcasm. Her last relationship had ended 2 years ago, but the way she talked about her ex gave me the sense that she was not fully over her. There was a lot of resentment from being cheated on, something I deeply related to but didn't tell her about. We had only gone on a few dates." Circled that. "But the feeling of being with her in person was nothing I ever felt before. Cuddling with her to a movie felt more intimate than anything physical in my last relationship. I told her I wanted to kiss her on the last date, and she was aggressive and made me feel desired. And then I'm not sure what happened. She texted me the next morning, but the conversation the following week felt cold. I suggested dates to meet up again, twice. But she gave some excuses for it without proposing another concrete meeting. Yet she still initiated texting when I gave her some space. I got anxious, and in wanting to assert boundaries, I texted her, assert boundaries. I texted her, 'Hey, when do you think I'll see you next?' To be honest, She's quoting herself, sending the text. I want to see the girl I'm dating more than once every week or two. I don't want to waste both our times if we're incompatible in that regard. She said, then you're probably right. We're not a good match. I'm someone that needs a lot of alone time until I'm comfortable with a person. It was gut-wrenching, the feeling, but I thought I would move on quickly given the short time frame. Almost immediately, I started to regret the ultimatum. After stewing on it, I texted her a week later that I missed talking to her. No response. Then 8 months later, I tried to say hi, that I enjoyed our last date. This is 8 months later, and wanted to see how she was doing. No response. At that point, I get it. She doesn't like me. I went on multiple other dates and even had a 4-month relationship. But it's been 2 years, and every day I'm still plagued by thoughts of her, the kiss, how she made me feel, and how no one can compare to her. I want to apologize to her for jumping to conclusions when she might have just been busy. But I also know there's no point. I'm torturing myself by checking up on her social media, even though she rarely posts. Now I deeply believe I'll never find anyone like her again. The thoughts are consuming and have affected my passion for work and other aspects of my life. Logically, I know it's ridiculous to be this hung up over someone I briefly dated. How do I move on? P.S., says Amy, my parents divorced when I was 1. There it is. And my father was never really in my life. There it is. But it had never bothered me. My mom and grandparents raised me, and I don't think I was neglected as a child. If anything, I've found my mother overbearing since high school. However, I had a lot of social anxiety growing up and few friends. It wasn't until college that I came out of my shell. Okay. Amy, I gotcha. All right. Let's go through what you told me. All right. So you always knew that you were into women, and for reasons that are pretty easy to understand, you didn't feel like you could go in that direction, and you went ahead and had a relationship with a man for 7 years, and you weren't into it physically, but there's something, when you say, oh, well, my parents divorced early and my dad wasn't in my life, and you were raised properly by your mom and grandparents, that's great. But I see an attachment wound here. There's a lot of behaviors that are like an attachment wound where you feel like you have to stay in a relationship you're not into for 7 years, even if you weren't clear yet what the main reason was, is that, you're into women, to stay there. You say the relationship ended up being codependent, and I'm not sure what you mean by that, because what you described was just that, oh, he cheated and you didn't find out about it for a long time. It sounds like you guys were both sort of in this relationship for convenience, but your hearts were elsewhere. When it ended, you were hurt by his actions, but you can't say that you didn't deserve it. Yeah, because you were not into it. And it sounds like he wasn't either. And that's, sometimes when one person can't really deal with intimacy, the perfect match is someone who also can't deal with intimacy. And so you had that. All right, you have your experience with that. Lesson learned. So you did a lot of self-work to redefine your identity without him and work on your sense of empathy and reflect on the relationship. And that's all great. Very good. And you fully moved on, and you weren't limerent, and you were available for love. Okay, great. All right, then the earthquake happens. Finally, you get to have a date with a woman. Finally, that happens. At the age of 28, you met her on a dating app, and you were talking for a few weeks, and you couldn't wait to tell your friends about the journey. Okay, this is where I started circling. You were excited about coming out. You were very excited about somebody you knew online, and so you built her into your coming out story. And I'm not sure literally what you mean by that, but I know for some people, that's like a formal story that is shared online with a lot of people about a special person and the experience and how it helped you, right? And it can be like this amazingly, powerful, liberating thing for people to be themselves and share that self with other people. But what struck me is that this was somebody you barely knew. And so it might be, of course it's part of your coming out story because it's the first time you dated a woman. So of course it's part of it, but I'm just wondering, did you put her online and sort of share this relationship that was barely getting off the ground? I just feel like this is why I started this video by talking about emotional spackle, that you had a need, I just keep sensing you have this attachment wound. You had a need to feel like this was all locked up. This was the one, everything's great. You had it so bad that you couldn't see that 3 weeks in of talking online, it may not be time to share somebody else's identity and make a big story about how together you are. And so again, I didn't see exactly what you said about that, but okay, so she was your type physically. You didn't know what you were looking for personality-wise. That's another sign of somebody who is not very, has an attachment wound and hasn't really gotten close to people and doesn't know herself very well, so that you don't know what you're looking for personality-wise. I'm going to recommend to you, throughout this whole thing, it's time for you to get really clear what is a suitable person for you. And you might be flexible about some personality traits, but there's going to be some bottom lines for you. Like, you want them to be emotionally available. You want them to be open to seeing you quite a bit early in the relationship. I'm going to talk to you about why maybe it's better that you don't get your wish on that, but let me get there. Okay. You knew you wanted down to earth. That's not saying very much. When I finally changed the way that I dated, because my attachment wound was just like ruining everything every time, I probably wrote down about 200 things. Some of them were like must have, some of them were nice to have, some of them were, just like, I kind of like it, but I can live without it. I really spent a lot of time. And when I did meet my now husband, I wasn't tempted to to fit myself to whoever he happened to be, which I had done with everybody before. There are certain deal breakers. They have to be really into me and excited about me as much as I am about them. And that's a deal breaker if they're not that person. And it's really good to be clear with yourself that if somebody's not into you, they have let you down. It's, you'll turn into yourself and go, what did I do wrong? But the problem is they don't have to give you what it is you must have, right? So I want you to take back your power and you as the center of your dating universe and just be like, I need somebody who's really into me. And then anybody who doesn't meet that standard, you don't date them. I know it's easier said than done. Believe me, I know. But that's the art of it, all right? That's how you stop having relationships that tear you apart, that erode your self-esteem, that consume years of your life, and you stay open to a relationship where there's a great deal of love going 2 ways, okay? All right, then, so she was your type physically, and you ended up very attracted to her blunt demeanor, her dry, sarcastic humor, and you bonded over love for lesbian pop culture. You talked every day for 6 weeks, and it was easy, and there was banter, which is, like that can happen online sometimes, and it's nice, but it doesn't mean it translates into in-person. And it seems like, there it is. She sounds like somebody who has... Well, maybe she just wasn't into you. Maybe meeting you in person, she wasn't feeling it, okay? I'm sure you were worried about that, and that seems distinctly possible. There's nothing wrong with her. It's just, like on the online level, it was great. This is really normal. It's so common. In fact, most relationships, even if they're fun online, will break down in person. It's such a deep combination of factors that make us continue to fall in love with somebody, right? So that's what dating needs to be, is a question. Dating is a question, like, is this person for me? And dates, the purpose of them is to find out incrementally, like, are they? Does their personality feel good to you? Do you feel good about yourself in this relationship? And I have some other signs that help indicate that a relationship is got legs to it, if you know what I mean. And among them are, do you become a better version of yourself as a result? And you simply cannot determine that in 6 weeks or 3 months. Like, this takes time. And so for anybody with attachment wounds, I just really recommend, you can go to my dating course. It's all laid out there, structured dating. I teach you how to stop choosing the people who aren't into you and set up your life so that you are open for business to date people who are into you. And with some healing inside, that can actually be attractive to you. And I know for all the people who end up with unavailable people, like, the problem is attraction. There's this eroticization of abandonment that makes us fall in love harder when people are pulling away from us, which is a maladaptation. It's not a good thing. And you can overcome it, but it's a deep thing to heal. And it's going to require your time and attention. Okay, so So then you say, admittedly, she had some walls up when it came to deeper topics, and she would use sarcasm. So yeah, maybe she didn't want something as deep as you did. Her last relationship ended 2 years before, and the way she talked about her ex gave you the sense that it wasn't really over. And that's always possible. That's why we got to slowly get to know people and see if they're actually emotionally available. And she wasn't. So there was a lot of resentment from you because you had been cheated on, something that you deeply, she was resentful about getting cheated on, and you related, but you didn't tell her about it, which early on, that's fine, We had only gone on a few dates, but the feeling of being with her in person was nothing I ever felt before. Cuddling to a movie was more intimate than anything you'd ever had with this boyfriend of the past. And, first of all, it sounds like you have a little bit of a tendency towards limerence. And so when your instincts know you can't really have somebody, but you're into them, then it'll feel like utter intimacy to you. But I just want to say, like, your perception is playing tricks. I guess you could call it intimacy. It's intimacy with your trauma, but it's not the kind of intimacy where you're really close to each other, you care about each other, you really know each other, you're there through thick and thin. Like, that's really what intimacy is. And but then there's factor two. She was a woman, so I would just expect, given that that's really what you're into, that it would have lit up your whole experience into Technicolor from what you had experienced before. So how exciting is that? And then you're not sure what happened. She texted you the next morning, but then she started giving you the cold shoulder. And then here's where you got into the sort of managing and controlling reality, where you were pretending that you were just setting boundaries or just thinking about her, but this was very dishonest. I'm going to call you on this because I want to help you not go into this behavior next time. When you're hurt because somebody you feel very close to and you're interested in is pushing you back, you can express it under certain circumstances, but what I do not recommend is texting them again and again. So she gave some excuses for not meeting up with you as you were asking her, and she didn't propose another concrete meeting. So that is the brush off. And people don't want to hurt you, and that's why they're not being direct with you and going, you know what, I just realized after spending the night with you, I'm not into it. Nobody wants to say that, or no kind person, and she may be very kind and good, and she doesn't want to say that and hurt you, so she's saying what people say, right? Just like, oh, well, there's a lot going on. And then she did text you again when you gave her some space. Aha, that's what I would have thought would happen. You must give people space. If you text once and they don't reply, you know, first of all, that's not a great sign. And if a few days go by, it's really not a great sign. If you've slept with somebody, that's pretty uncaring. So, you know, things are starting to look grim when somebody doesn't get back to you. But then if they do, you can assess the situation. But I really recommend you do not repeatedly text somebody. So, of course, you got anxious because, again, I think you have an attachment wound going on. And in wanting to assert boundaries, you texted, hey, okay, I'm calling you out. That's not a boundary. That's an attempt to manipulate and control. And I'm being very direct with you because I think you have a lot going on with your mental health, and I just want to tell you the truth. Like, what you did there was not a good thing for a relationship that was just hanging in the balance. Maybe there was going to be another date. So I'm not blaming you, because the fact is, if something's right, then you being anxious and being kind of pushy isn't going to ruin it, all right? And somebody being a little bit sarcastic and avoidant isn't going to ruin it. Like, if the feeling is there, it's going to get its chance to be a relationship and see what happens. But this fell apart early, and so I'm just advising you to really be thoughtful about etiquette on dating. It's not a boundary to tell somebody that they have to see you a lot more often or you're going to dump them. That might be true if you're in a longer term relationship, that you could assess it and say, this isn't what I want it to be. But I would just say, this looks like pure attachment wound thinking right there, that after this very short time and one night together, you're just like, it has to be this certain way. What you can do, if you really have that need and that requirement, you get to have that, but just you don't spend nights with people until there's a real demonstrated fact and truth and expression and words and clarity that they are into you, that they want this to go farther and they want to spend time with you. So many of us, and especially, we're like living in a culture where it's normal, where people will just sort of like sleep together fairly early. And then those of us with attachment wounds will play the role of somebody who's like, I'm so cool about this. I expect nothing, but actually we're not capable of producing that cool girl inside. Just the anxiety starts and we're like, please fix this feeling for me. I can't handle that you're not calling. And I know on some level that your pursuit and your pressure for her to fix your feelings there by calling when she wasn't ready. I know that was a problem, that would pushed her away. But again, it wouldn't have pushed her away if she was fundamentally into you. So don't worry. We can only be ourselves. And the only person that anybody's ever going to fall in love with is your actual self. So it's okay that you bring these kind of, dents and dings and kind of quirks into the relationship, that you have sensitivities, that you're insecure about things. It's okay. But you're just going to have a better ride, and you're going to have a clearer mind to be able to spot like who's a good potential partner and have a chance to, enjoy life together and go on some dates and hang out. If you can kind of stay inside your hula hoop and not try to make other people be something. What dating is it's your opportunity to behold, what has this person got to offer me? Let's see how they feel. And as my mentor told me when I was first dating my husband, let information come to you. I was so tempted to be like, hey, are we going to see each other this week? I'm just like, I'd be anxious. My kids were going to be at their dad's, and I just really wanted to have a weekend plan. And I too would come up with things that I thought sounded a little better than the truth, which is like, I'm anxious because I want to see you and I think maybe you don't like me. That was the truth, right? So I'd come up with stuff. And so I just think you saying you were trying to set a boundary, you expressed a preference, you expressed a desire. Your boundary is where you walk away from the relationship. So you did, and you regretted that ultimatum, and the reason is it's not really how you felt. And that's why I said it was a manipulation. And you sure wouldn't be the first of us to resort to pretending that you have these high standards, that you won't put up with it, and then going, oh no, they went away, and then going, that's okay, I'll abandon my standards and go back. I don't think it was quite your standard. I think it was too soon for you to, early dating, you just like hang out, just see what happens. And it's really, for a person with attachment wounds, if you can avoid sex, it will allow you a lot more space and time to be able to stay alert, to navigate without your attachment wound coming on and going, attach. That's what we do. We attach instantly to people we barely know. And you did it for 7 years before you attached, and then you couldn't leave, probably because you were afraid of the abandonment melange that comes up, that intense, terrible feeling. So a person with complex PTSD who has been abandoned, and you were abandoned by your dad when you were 1, and I assure you it matters. You had that happen, and so this wound comes out, and if you don't learn to be very real with yourself about it, it can chase you all your life. It can chase away everybody who tries to love you. It can chase you away from the quiet awareness of discovering how somebody feels about you, thinking, I've got to make this work. I've got to make this work. It's a painful place to be, and it's not something that healthy people are that attracted to. You can do this, all right? Come to the dating course. I lay it all out in detail, and there's always a link down below in the description section if you want to check that out. So you said, then 8 months later, you texted her again. Hi, I enjoyed our last date. I want to see how you're doing. So that sounds, okay, I'm going to be hard on you. It sounds a bit crazy, right? Because she knows and you know that she ghosted you, and you just saying, hey, that was so great. I just wanted to know how you're doing. You're faking, like you think you can trick her into thinking like everything's breezy and maybe you can, get her back. And I just would say, if you want her back, you just be direct. It doesn't sound like it's going anywhere, but don't even think of making shit up about how you feel and why you're getting back in touch after 8 months. And I've been there and I've done it, and it doesn't, it just confuses matters, because then when you get rejected, you don't know, is it because of how I really feel? Or let's say you did reconnect and come back together. Is it because it was a false premise that you were promising that you were cool girl? And, I'm not all hurt and trying to sort out my life here and feeling limerent on you. I'm just, I'm just wondering how you are because I'm so nice. I'm not making fun of you. I'm making fun of me. I just know this like the back of my hand. Things got better for me when I got just like brutally honest with myself. Not brutal with other people, but rigorously honest with other people. And one of the things, this is not what you're talking about, but like when I had done enough of this kind of thing, I was just like, I don't want to date anybody else who doesn't want children. I was in my 30s. I was totally clear I wanted children. And I would just put it right out there. I want to have kids. Do you want to have kids? And I'm, not like, do you want to have kids right now? But I wouldn't even go out with anybody unless that was their agenda too. That was a really smart thing I did. I didn't organize everything in the perfect order and all nice and everything, but I do have kids and I'm really glad because that was what I wanted. And their dad did too. And we just didn't want each other. It's worked out now. We each have a good spouse. And that's what I mean, is that things can work out in the end. Love wins in the end. If you can hang in there and keep being honest, keep being, kind, keep being attentive to reality and deal with that attachment wound. That attachment wound can take you out for the rest of your life, really. And I know that when we put this video out there, there will be a lot of older folks who will say, it's too late for me, I blew it. And, you can't just like heal something and everything changes. And I'm just going to say, I don't know, maybe you can, maybe you can't, but everything good depends on you overcoming that thing where you have to become some fake version of yourself because you think it will help you get your needs met. At this stage, you're an adult, and that is never what the case is, unless you're like hiding from, I don't know, I'm just thinking of people who had to hide from tyrants and things in history. Yeah, say whatever you have to say, but that's not what this is. This is falling in love, all right? You can do this. Yeah, you deeply believe you'll never find anyone like her again. I hope you don't, because she's not into you. I want you to find somebody who is into you, who's not like her at all. That sarcasm you saw, like it might have been entertaining, but it really sucked when she couldn't be real or deep with you about anything. So, it's a good thing. And what I recommend here is that you get a technique to start processing your feelings and moving them downstream so that you're not carrying this grief forever and ever. It needs to like move on through. What I do for that is called the daily practice. It's a free set of techniques. I teach them to everybody. It's always in the description section. It's on the free tools page of the Crappy Childhood Fairy website. Anybody can go there. Being in a relationship with someone who was traumatized as a kid can be wonderful because those of us with trauma can be very compassionate and insightful. And we can be very hard to be with because we've got trauma wounds. Partners with CPTSD, yes, we're sensitive and prickly, and we can have a tendency to put it all on you to make us feel better. Like when we're feeling stressed and anxious, unless there's a lot of healing, we sometimes try to blame you for the bad feeling and make you responsible to make it go away. Now, with healing, people with CPTSD can genuinely assume responsibility for their own moods and their own trauma symptoms and states of dysregulation and coming back from that. So this is true of everyone. If you, as a partner, have any kind of people-pleasing going on, or you're feeling insecure in the relationship, there's a risk that you're going to try to accept that responsibility of keeping them happy. And as much as you want to be a good partner, it's not helpful to either of you to take the fall for them like that. Supportive, yes, but trying to control their mood, no. So my letter today is from someone I'll call Seth, and he writes, "Hello, Crappy Childhood Fairy. My fiance has CPTSD, and your videos have helped me understand what she's going through and why certain things happen between us." I got my fairy pencil. I'm going to circle things I want to come back to on a second reading, but let's read through Seth's letter and see what's going on. He says, "Our relationship is so much better because of watching you and reading people like Pete Walker." Yes. "A question that I often find myself grappling with, however, is about my own personal responsibility toward my partner. I think it's completely normal for partners to feel frustration with each other." Yes, it is, Seth. "And get upset by certain behaviors and ask for specific adjustments within reason to suit each other's needs. Obviously, that happens with or without CPTSD. However, I have difficulty knowing when to blame some of these reactions and requests from her on a flashback and when to actually adjust my behavior to her needs. Do you have any tips for separating a reasonable request from a partner from a demand rooted in trauma? I'm scared of it becoming a sort of get out of jail free card for me when I should reflect on my own behavior, and I'm scared of pathologizing her behavior, potentially gaslighting her, and not taking her seriously when I should. Equally, I'm very scared I will encourage flashbacks if I adjust my behavior to them too much. How should I think about this? Thank you. All right, Seth, this is such a good question, and I'm so glad you asked. And in a way, I wish you had told me like what it is we're talking about, because it would give me a frame of reference. But you're sort of like, you're setting me up to just sort of say, here are some general rules, and I'll try to make that as helpful as I can. So a person with CPTSD who has become aware that they have emotional flashbacks. And you said Pete Walker. So Pete Walker is a therapist who identified this thing called emotional flashbacks. It's a little different than the kind of flashbacks that a person with regular post-traumatic stress syndrome has. So we know about that from, like, you see movies about war veterans. They come home, they're having nightmares. They wake up frantic. They want to hit somebody. They're living through a memory, and then they wake up and they're like, oh gosh, I'm in present time. An emotional flashback tends to have formed in childhood, like early childhood, before there was language. So there is no memory. There is no way to say, oh, that was just a dream. I thought I was back in this terrible situation, but I'm here now. It's just a feeling that's upon you. And it's a very, very strong and very sort of consuming feeling of like anger, dread, panic, crying, grief, very strong. And when people with complex PTSD, I mean, Pete Walker's so brilliant for naming this. It's sort of like having a dream while you're awake and putting a layer of terribleness on things that isn't actually there. And it's very hard for partners to deal with because they're like, but I didn't say that, but I didn't do that. You're acting like I'm a murderer. It's a very hard situation to be in when somebody is in an emotional flashback and you can't reason with them. Very upsetting, right? And so the words that come out of our mouths when one person is in a flashback will tend to be arguing. It's a fight. It's like, yes, you did. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. You don't care. Yes, I do. It just escalates. It can't be done. I'm going to lay down the law here, and your fiance, I don't know if she cares what I'm saying here. I hope she does. But the person with CPTSD, with the benefit of this knowledge of what a flashback is, needs to use the flashback information in that Pete Walker book. He has this excellent list on, what to do. And the first thing is admit. Just say to yourself, I am in an emotional flashback. And then you start to ground yourself back in reality. What you don't do is go and try to hammer out all the future of the relationship and get the other person to take responsibility, because the other person does not cause the emotional flashback. Other people, are unpleasant sometimes. They cross boundaries. They say things that are hurtful. Like, other people are people. And all the things that people do, other people do. But the emotional flashback is within, and it cannot be the responsibility of other people. That's a really bad strategy to try to manage one's own CPTSD, is to put the responsibility on other people. So I'll tell you, here's something that causes an emotional flashback in me. Getting awakened suddenly at night can't totally be helped, right? Sometimes a siren goes off or something, or the cat jumps on the bed. But my husband very courteously tries not to wake me up suddenly, abruptly in the middle of the night. That is common courtesy. That is something you would do for anybody. But we know that sometimes I'd just be like, ah! Also, I don't like getting tickled. Tickling is off limits for anybody who knows me. I get an emotional flashback from that trigger. But most of my emotional flashbacks are not caused by anything in this world. They're coming up from the dark hole of memory. It tends to be something I wake up with. It's nobody's fault. It's not my fault. It's nobody's fault. It's just a neurological phenomenon. It comes up. And it started to get better when I could go, I'm having an emotional flashback. That's what it is. And how I deal with it is, I do not try to talk it out with my husband or anybody else. I go use my tools by myself to take all the feelings that come up for me in that emotional flashback. And here's what they feel like. Oh my God, I have to do everything. Nobody helps me with anything. It's a very adversarial way to approach your husband on a Sunday morning. And I used to do it. I didn't know I was having flashbacks. I would just like pay attention to my feelings and be like, I am just so fed up with the way I have to do everything. And I did not know until I read what an emotional flashback was. I just didn't have that reference point to go, oh, that's weird. I do it whether I don't know, like there's always an amount of undone stuff. And sometimes we're like, it's your turn to do the chore or whatever. We have all that, like all couples. But my emotional flashbacks are in no way linked to what's actually going on. It's coming from in here. And it makes me very unpleasant when I'm doing it. And it makes him actually like want to get away and definitely not want to fix the problem by doing chores. Because actually, even if he does chores, that's nice when people do chores. Let's say it's chores is the issue. It doesn't fix my emotional flashback. Nothing you do out here fixes it. And the telltale sign that you're in a flashback, not in some sort of couple dynamic where you, Seth, are responsible, is that no matter what you do, it doesn't fix it. That means it's inside her, right? And not to just blame her, like we're each people, we each bring our complications to relationships. But so that's, I used to spend hours, trying to process problems in relationships and, but I felt this way, but you're not acknowledging how I felt, but you're not hearing me, you just don't even take it seriously. All these feelings. That's the emotional flashback talking. I mean, those things could really be happening and have in my life, but when it's just like coming out no matter what he tries to do, he's like tap dancing, he did all the chores, it's my emotional flashback. So what a smart partner does is just go, honey, I'm going to let you work this out, and I'm here to, work in the actual realm of reality here after you're done doing what you do. But when you work out your emotional flashback, I find it very hard to deal with you when it's like this. My husband setting boundaries on me was the best thing he could have done. It made it necessary. I didn't like it at first, right? I was very convinced that he was making me feel that unpleasant feeling that I had. But it forced me to have to read a book and learn what it is and take responsibility and discover through my own experience how much better things could go when I dealt with my own flashback, right? And I'm not the designated patient in this relationship, and nor is your fiance. We each bring our weird things to the relationship. With you, I hear you really trying to please her, and I'm going to encourage you, don't try to solve things by tap dancing for her, like, honey, I'll do anything. Don't do that, because you're saying it encourages flashbacks. I don't think it encourages flashbacks per se. That's a neurological thing that she will learn to do better with if she works her own tools on it. The false belief in each of you that you are responsible for the way she's feeling, and therefore that you've messed up when you don't fix it for her. See, the person who tap dances and tries to make the other person happy ultimately gets blamed. It's like, you haven't fixed me yet. I still feel terrible, and now the dinner is ruined. And I'm just making fun of all of us, I'm making fun of my own life. I've been through these arguments so many times, and I am so glad to be out of them, And so it takes like a tenth of the effort to just take my tools, use my daily practice, make a phone call if I have to, write my fears and resentments, meditate. When I say write my fears and resentments, everybody don't try that at home. Take my free course. You can learn and try the specific technique, not to rant and exacerbate your negative feelings, but to actually get relief from them. Try the technique and then meditate. Those are the tools I use. And then I come back with a fresh perspective. It turns out my emotional flashbacks are very treatable when I know the tools to use. They don't go away forever, and if I'm not using my tools or I'm very tired or run down, it'll come back. And it's sort of, I always say that having CPTSD, it's a bit like having diabetes, where you could really live quite well, if you eat a certain way, if you take your medicine, if you deal with it, if you do what you can do. But if you stop doing all those things, it comes back. And that's my experience of CPTSD. So it's a maintenance thing. And I don't think couples can survive happily if they get into a dynamic that the person who doesn't have CPTSD is responsible to keep the other one from getting triggered. The proper basis for marrying somebody is to accept them as they are, can I just say. Now, I know we do, like you said, we have to make requests within reason, and that's okay, but it's not within reason to say that you're responsible for her flashbacks. Boundaries are much better for you, and a total gift to her, so that she can really know, even though it's a painful lesson sometimes, what part of what's inside her hula hoop of responsibility. And sometimes when we're feeling terrible and a person is standing right in front of us, it's just easy to think, you're the one, because blame is one of our self-defeating behaviors. Blaming other people or blaming ourselves, but just getting into, somebody's the terrible bad guy here. With CPTSD, the damage was done. We know who did that, maybe. But what's relevant now is just like, we got to use our tools. We got to use our tools and navigate this as best we can so that we don't generate new trauma, new relationship breakdown, new generational, terror. Because that's what happens when we form relationships when CPTSD is active and turning into, terrible dynamics, is we pass it on to another generation. So you can do this. Your healing is to focus on yourself, and I would really encourage you to possibly check out a 12-step program. So rather than you watching my content on her behalf, I'm glad you understand it, you work on content for you about possibly being codependent or in there trying to manage her happiness. That's what codependence is. And that is something that you can change. You can heal that. I'm talking this week about the book No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover for men who often pour their life energy away trying to make some woman happy and nobody's happy. That dynamic, I don't know if that applies to you, but you might want to check that out. And also Codependence Anonymous and ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Other Dysfunctional Families. I don't know if that applies to you, but someplace where you are focusing on you, how you feel, and so that you have group support and you're getting to know other men who are walking this path too, and you have friendship where you can truly be open and honest about what you're going through and get that mutual support from people. It's very hard to avoid developing an attachment wound when you grew up in a toxic home. And what is so unfair about that is the attachment wound will drive you into relationships with people who aren't available, aren't good to you, and aren't someone you ever really liked. Attachment wounds make you rush in with people you don't know, and then they make you so afraid to be alone that even if the relationship is terrible, you trick yourself into believing that the problem is somehow you. So how can you break the cycle? My letter today is from a woman I'll call Sasha, and she writes, "Dear Crappy Childhood Fairy, I'm heartbroken over a failed relationship I don't even think I wanted in the first place. You can call me Sasha. My boyfriend, who let's call Carlos, just broke up with me, and I just want this gnawing pit of hurt in my chest to go away so I can get back to focusing on me, especially since I know it's ultimately for the best. Right now, I just feel raw hurt, embarrassed, and confused. I have CPTSD and symptoms of borderline personality disorder. Due to growing up in a toxic, abusive home, I have the worst fear of abandonment, yet I'm always the first to push someone away. My mother is a narcissist who abused me physically, verbally, mentally, and emotionally from the time I was 3 up until early adulthood. She controlled every aspect of my life until I moved out when I was 22. My father was cold, grouchy, mean, and distant. He often complained about having to care for his family and only married my mom so she wouldn't make him pay child support. When I was little, I was Daddy's little girl. My dad was my hero since he let me get away with everything, and my mom was explosively angry and strict. I know now he just didn't care and would let us kids do as we pleased so we wouldn't bother him. He doesn't even speak to me or acknowledge my presence now. When I started dating, most of my relationships mirrored that. Things are sunshine and rainbows at first. I'm the most amazing being that person ever met, only for them to completely switch on me more often than not after sex. Okay. Or I just push them away by making a mountain out of a molehill, assuming at some point that the other shoe will drop, even if nothing really happened. I was in a relationship until today with Carlos since this past winter. We met online as friends, and we were a long-distance couple with almost 1,500 miles between us. We clicked immediately, realizing we could talk about any and everything together. I felt like we had chemistry, but we definitely had our differences. As friends, he would often just stop talking to me out of nowhere, going months, occasionally a year plus, without speaking to me, and then popping up as if no time had passed at all. He explained it as just who he is. He's very nonchalant and keeps to himself, even going long periods of time without contacting his mother when she visits her home country. We were always flirtatious, but made it clear we most likely weren't going to be together. Okay. I wanted to have kids one day, and he did not. He also said that he doesn't believe in long-distance relationships. Fast forward to the present, we started dating back in March of this year when I went to his city to visit him. This was after 10 months of no contact. Prior to that, I traveled to his city to visit. The city he lives in happens to be my favorite place in the world. It feels like home, and I hope to move there someday. The week I spent with him was one of the most romantic weeks of my life. We went on road trips, explored the city hand in hand, and eventually became intimate. When I returned home, he proudly informed me that he enjoyed our time together so much that he was going to start dating other women. When I asked why, he said it made no sense to be with me since I lived so far away. I was crushed and cut off all contact with him, even though before I laid down with him, I knew he didn't want anything serious with me. I went to his city in March for an event and decided to contact him. In my mind, I felt like I was selfish, only thinking about what I wanted. After all, he's allowed not to want a long-distance relationship. I contacted him to see if he wanted to talk, just so I could hear him out, since I blocked him immediately 10 months prior. In all honesty, my intention was just to talk, be friendly, and part ways. We met up, we talked, and he said he was never upset with me. And during the conversation, I casually mentioned that over the pandemic and doing a lot of self-reflection, I realized I may not want to have kids either. Side note, that's only half true. I still have the desire to be a mom, but I have a lot of anxiety and fear around it at the same time. Nevertheless, the minute I said that, he asked me to be his girlfriend. I was elated and said yes. Oh. Over the spring and summer, we met up in person twice, and it was wonderful. However, the problems arose when we were apart. He never wanted to call me or video chat, which I feel is important if you're in a long-distance partnership. He only wanted to text, often sending the same good morning, good night text daily. Many times I would call and he would opt to spend time with his adult niece over talking to me. Mind you, this is a niece he complains about for being selfish and rude constantly. I got really emotional about it once. He promised he would work at it, but never really did. This last time it happened a couple weeks ago is what broke us. He said going time without talking to me is not a big deal, and he felt like I was revolving my world around him and said he didn't want that kind of pressure. And there it is. He also said he knows he should call more, but he does not like being on the phone. I had just went through a really stressful move. My cat ran away when I got to the new house. The cat came back, and I discovered that my new roommates are trashy. Having dealt with housing trauma most of my adulthood, I felt overwhelmed and just wanted my boyfriend. I snapped at him and told him it's not just being on the phone, it's spending time together. I nearly broke up with him, but then I immediately felt remorseful about the way I acted and told him I would take a couple weeks to get my head together. I was supposed to be taking another trip to see him over the holiday weekend, and I took that time and I spent some of it writing him a letter apologizing. Explained how some of my childhood trauma triggered a lot of feelings of jealousy and fear of abandonment. I also expressed how much I loved him and how I wanted us to work. I texted him the same day the letter was delivered, telling him I missed him and I loved him. 2 days went by and I had no response. I finally reached out to him and asked if we were okay, and he ended the relationship. He said he doesn't think he's built for long distance, and they only work if they have an expiration date. He doesn't believe I'll ever move to his city, and said if I really planned on moving, I would have saved up all the free money I got during the pandemic. I felt that comment was very insensitive, considering that was an uncertain time for everyone. I used that money to take care of myself, since I'm the only one that does, and I will never regret that. He also said that we were just too different. I'm mad at myself more than anything. I allowed myself to be vulnerable with him once before, got my heart broken, and didn't learn. I don't want to go back to him, but at the same time, I do, and I hate how confusing it feels. There's that word again. Confused. I keep hearing that. I'll tell you what I think about that in a minute. I hate feeling abandoned and rejected. I hate thinking of him being with someone else, because between us, he's really not even my type, physically or personality-wise. So why do I even care? Yeah. I put so much into being with him and never got the same energy back. I surprised him by buying tickets to a water park during one of my visits that we didn't even get to use because he said he wouldn't have time. Yep. That was almost $200 gone to waste. I made reservations at a very expensive restaurant for us to go when I visit that will also be going to waste. I also tried to make myself available for him, also initiated the affection only to be treated like an option for him when he's bored. I often do that, even with platonic relationships. I put so much more than I'm getting back only to get upset and feel taken advantage of. Even though it's 100% my fault. I don't have any friends. Oh, there it is. Other than one really good friend who also happens to live far away. However, he's in a relationship and I don't like imposing on him too much. I'm pretty isolated and crave connection, yet I'm extremely socially anxious. I wonder if I agreed to being with Carlos because I was tired of being alone. How many people have we done that with, right? Yet oftentimes, being with him, I felt more alone than ever. I try to create the idea of what I think a relationship should be in my head. I mean, what else can you do, right? And even if that's not reality, even if the other person is clearly not on the same page. I'm not sure I want to be with anyone right now because it's too painful to even fathom that. As badly as I want love in my life, the idea of going out there and dating seems exhausting. I just want the hurt to go away so I can get back to improving my life. For me, any advice is help and it's appreciated. Okay, all right, Sasha, I got you. Yeah, what a situation. Everything that you're describing with this guy just sounds totally normal for those of us who grew up the way you grew up. And, you know, I'm laughing with self-recognition here. Your mom, narcissist, abused, controlling, and your father was cold, grouchy, mean, and distant, and they were against each other, and you were in the middle of all of that. And so when you started dating, most of your relationships mirrored that, and they still do. So you're still in it. You're still at the effect, right? You know, believe me, it can stop going this way, but you're going to have to make a big change for that to happen. It's not going to just evolve because you meet the right guy or, you know, just sort of decide. Like, it's really going to take a conscious effort on your part. One of the biggest thing it takes to change your pattern of dating unavailable people or falling in love with them, you know, it's almost like you weren't even quite dating here. It was so dodgy. But to stop falling in love and, you know, pouring your life force out for unavailable people, one of the most important things you can do is get clear what is an appropriate person for you and really be specific, like what are the characteristics of that person. First of all, they have to be able to be with you. And maybe a long distance relationship would instantly be ruled out. In order to date somebody and get to know them, you have to spend time together. And so if spending time together is prohibitive, a lot of your years of your life can go by, you know, not really getting to know somebody. And because you have a pattern here, you're telling me you have a pattern, you go for people like this, they don't really care about you, you pour out all your energy. I would just treat this like time for the emergency plan, time to treat it like a very serious condition that has to be handled in a very special way. So I would just take off the table, no long distance relationships. And then write down other things that are that would ruin this, okay? Need to be available to date, need to express that they're interested, need to continually express that they're interested, need to stay in communication and decide, like, what's a realistic amount of communication that you would need to feel okay? And this can be dictated by what feels okay to you. You don't have to lower your standards to make room for some guy who goes with the wind, baby. He calls every month if he feels like it. Get used to it. Don't be that girl. Do not be cool girl. That's terrible. That's just awful. And that's just how he is. And so that's the thing. Like, in your childhood, nobody was helping you sort of develop your sense of like, this doesn't feel like I'm getting treated right. How about this? No, I'm out. Or, you know, you never know what relationships can go like when you actually have boundaries. I'm not telling you to go back to this guy. And you did such a good job of self-awareness to realize you were doing everything. You did all the lifting. You called him. He blew you off. You told him you loved him. He didn't do anything. You called him, you texted him, you know, and then he just said he ended it. And that, I just think if it gets to the point that only you are driving it, first of all, it means they're not driving it. And some people will drive it if you get out of the way a little bit. You know, never be the one who drives more if you have what we have. if you have a tendency to sort of rush in and attach, even though you don't like him. Like you said, he's not even your type. And sister, have I been there? You just attach anyway. And it's loneliness driven. Loneliness is terrible. It's really hard to be alone. And it's very tempting just to have a boyfriend if it seems like one is there for the taking. But then you don't really like them, so it doesn't really work, even if they did want to be with you. And then they don't want to be with you because it's not right, and they see it. And then it's like, oh no, I'm getting abandoned. And that is exactly what it's like to have an attachment wound. You rush in and you can't get out. Because getting out triggers that abandonment melange feeling that's unbearable. Like it's worth staying in a miserable relationship all your life in your mind, to avoid that terrible feeling that you get when relationships end. Either they end it or you end it. But like when we end it, then we go into this like terrible remorse and go running back. Like how many times have you done that? So that's what we have to heal. We have to heal how we handle our feelings that come up when we date. And we don't want to, create a whole bunch of dating opportunities that you could predict are not going to work out. The ones that you can tell won't work out because you don't have the same goals, because they're not your type, because you haven't done the due diligence to let things develop and have them show you, have them demonstrate to you that they're interested through their behavior without any, demands or encouragement or pushing from you. You can sort of like show a little flirtation and then just see what they do. And, interestingly, a lot of people, certainly men, will, if you are not pushing for it, it becomes a little more interesting to them. Nobody really likes somebody who's pushing, and we all have a nervous system, and even when we're saying one thing with our mouth and acting like we're cool and it's okay, our nervous system will communicate the feeling of desperation, the feeling of frantic need for this to work out no matter what. And so even when they're hearing the words they want to hear, they're feeling with their nervous system like something's not right. The words, I don't believe the words, or something feels desperate here. And that's the harshest thing, right? Because when you're feeling desperate, like desperate for love, desperate for companionship, and people are like, oh, don't be desperate. It's like, you don't be desperate. You don't know what it's like. It's a desperate situation to be alone for a long time. It's hard, right? And yet we have to learn how to be happy and at peace, and to have a sense of awareness, so that we're really just like paying attention and observing another person, rather than, attaching to them and retroactively finding out who they are and then being disappointed. That's not kind. It's not fair. So really getting to know somebody slowly as a friend, possibly a little flirtation there. If you want to take my dating course, I walk you through that process of, really naming what you want. I mean, a couple hundred criteria is good to do. You're not going to get everything you want, but it's really good to get clear about what the deal breakers are and start to just, shine sunlight on what your heart's desire really is. Because when we grew up with parenting like you had, when that happens, we're so good at crap fitting. We're so good at like, well, I really, I want children. And then, because he's being distant, this jerk you don't even like is being distant. Then you're like, well, actually, no, I worry about having kids. So let me phrase that as, no, I don't want kids either. Like that is way too big a thing to be crap fitting on. And you know that. I mean, I'm not trying to lecture you, but just for the sake of validation, like, don't do that. This guy is not for you. He didn't match on that thing. So even if he was wonderful, you guys don't match. So, and then you're beating yourself up and saying, I allowed myself to get, the anxiety, the fear. I did all this stuff. And you're also trying to like reason with. So here's the thing. When somebody breaks up with you, it's going to be a mix. They're going to tell you just enough to help you understand that they don't want to be with you, but they may not be telling you all the details. And some of the details might be fudged a little bit, because even when people are breaking up with you, most of them would rather not hurt you. And it doesn't sound like this guy is a sadist or anything. I mean, I'm kind of with you. I feel like he was telling you all along, I kind of would like to be connected to you. I'm not even sure I want to date you. I don't think there's a future for us. And, everything in his behavior was consistent with that. And I don't blame you. We're in a culture where it's like, yeah, but you can have sex anyway. But when you have an attachment wound, if you have sex with somebody who really is not available, like this guy wasn't, it doesn't matter. Your nervous system reads it as we're together now. And that's just how it rolls. That's just how it works. And I'm like that. And a lot of people are like that. And it's considered like something is wrong with it, but actually it's totally healthy. The part that's not healthy is the part where we can't acknowledge where we're coming from and what we want. And then we pretend to be somebody we're not. We try to, fit ourselves to somebody else's idea of what would work. And then we just cannot fight with ourselves enough. We can't successfully shut down the part of ourselves that protests loudly. I don't want this. I want the real thing. I want the full thing. I want the thing that leads to kids. That's not going to shut up in you. You can't expect a relationship to work when you're hiding that part of yourself. So ironically, you want people to get pushed away by the truth of you. So if that's what you want, if kids are what you want, like I'm also a person, like I knew I wanted kids and I was sick of ending up in sort of quasi-relationships with people who were not suitable for having kids with or definitely didn't want them. And I got very clear about it, and then I just wore it on my sleeve. And then, I didn't manage that whole process perfectly or anything, and stuff happened. I ended up with children, but at that time, I was not with a good partner. And but at least I was no longer, spending all that time, all of my 30s, pretending to go along with somebody who was that was never going to happen. And getting honest with myself is a process, and it started there, and I'm so grateful for my kids. I really, all my life, I knew that I wanted kids, and I have 2 wonderful kids, and their dad is my friend. He's my friend. We were briefly married. It didn't work out, not surprisingly, and he showed up and helped parent the kids very well. So, yay, I'm glad I got honest. And if I were a perfect person and I didn't have trauma, I would have done things in a much different way. And I would have done it in the order you're supposed to do it. I would have, found the right guy and gotten married early. And I would have loved to have had more kids. But everything just transpired the way it did. For a person with trauma, I feel good about how it went. So it's really important to be honest with yourself about what your heart's desire really is, or you're not going to get it. And I would like you to have everything that your heart's desire tells you that you need to be happy, and stop compromising it and stop fitting it to some guy that you met online. When you grew up neglected or abused, yes, you can end up with an anxious attachment style. And that can leave you craving validation and reassurance in relationships that, no, your partner's not about to leave you. But you can also end up following trauma-driven thinking to rationalize your partner's terrible behavior, to dress it up in the language of psychology as a way to dissociate from your feelings and your basic common sense that, you know what, they're lying to you, they're cheating, they're manipulating, and yes, they might leave you. My letter today is from a woman I'll call Katie, and she writes, "Hi, Anna. I'm 6.5 years into a relationship with someone who is often wonderful." All right, I've got the fairy pencil. I'm going to circle things I want to come back to in a second reading, but let's read through and see what Katie is saying. All right. She says, he's affectionate, kind, listens to me well, knows how to apologize in a very satisfying way, can really put his defenses down when things are hard, and he shows up so beautifully in very tangible ways in my day-to-day life and in the lives of others. We both have CPTSD and can be very sensitive and compassionate with each other's triggers, especially if we aren't both triggered at the same time. We don't live together, but usually we spend about half the week sleeping at each other's places, eating, shopping, taking care of life business and our personal businesses, enjoying walks, bike rides, and connecting with the people in our community. We talk and see each other almost every day, but appreciate space to connect with groups and alone time. From my perspective, things are going well most of the time. When things aren't going well, I get anxious and he gets avoidant. Like many who have experienced early childhood trauma, he gets overwhelmed easily. There are times when he can't find words or receive words. He dissociates. From there, he sometimes avoids whatever the feeling is underneath, using fantasy, sometimes porn, sometimes alcohol or marijuana. At some point, when any of those are active, I fear his avoidance has taken over. If I can approach with enough spaciousness and curiosity, naming observations without bringing up passions or judgments, Most of the time, he will own up to what's happening and clean up his act, becoming more physically, mentally, and emotionally available. It's a cycle. In our history, the cycles have gotten further and further apart, but when they occur until he comes back to me, I can feel utterly helpless and hopeless. Is that just my abandonment stuff to work on? He recently acknowledged that without realizing it, he plays the rescuer as he shows up beautifully, and that he has a hard time staying connected to his true desires from a moment to moment because he fears losing me. But the not staying true to himself adds to his sense of overwhelm because he loses touch with how to express himself, and he starts not wanting to be with me and amplifying the numbing behaviors. He's working on it. He's practicing saying what might be hard for me to hear. Practicing. I say and feel him leaning in our connection, and he goes to therapy regularly for what it's worth. But I'm not sure where my boundary is and when I put boundaries up to avoid being with what is true. For example, I set a boundary that he not tell me about his fantasies or his ex unless he has decided to actually leave me. I don't want to hear about things that bring up my fear that he's leaving, especially not when they come as a surprise. He feels hurt that I don't accept all of him and says he just wants to tell me about whatever the fantasies are. It's a lot of pencil going on here. He says he just wants to tell me about whatever the fantasies are, not act them out, but to express them instead of hiding them. I've done and am doing a lot of work on myself, soothing the part of me that gets scared when he starts to withdraw or when he has a fantasy. Sometimes I let him deal with not getting to tell me everything. Sometimes I invite him to share when I feel resourced or curious. It helps when I initiate so that it doesn't feel like he drops a bomb on me and he doesn't feel like he has to hide some unlovable part of himself. Important backstory, says Katie. Okay, about 1.5 years into our relationship, not long after he moved to town to be with me, he suddenly needed to go back to his ex to see if she was still in love with him. Big red flag. I broke up with him and he moved on quickly with other women in our circle, in your circle, thinking that we would eventually get together again and he would never be able to have sex with anyone again, so he had to act on the opportunity. Ouch. Though I didn't appreciate those experiences, when COVID came, I needed support and reached out to him. Yes, I chose to be in a relationship with someone who was willing to dismiss my needs and do hurtful things. I'm not proud of that, but I don't regret it. It made sense as we were going into isolation, and I knew my mental health would suffer without physical and emotional connection for what looked like a long road ahead. I figured we'd get through COVID and see where things stood. The isolation gave us time to slow down and look at ourselves and our patterns and build trust and connection. It had seemed like we were doing well in spite of some of the challenges we have. This summer was very busy and he was more avoidant than I prefer, but I felt stronger in my sense of trust that we'd work it out in time and that I didn't need to and couldn't control what was happening. But then he announced that he's not in love with me. When I finally got back into my body and went to learn about what he meant, we moved toward each other and things have felt better, though with hesitation on my part. He now tells me that being in love is a fantasy state and that while he longs for it, he recognizes that truer love is not a passionate and sexy, but is deep and valuable, and he wants to be with me. I feel as back in the zone where he is communicating his care and he's open and available to work on things. It took a lot of work to build trust after he left to explore sex in other places. Now I can choose to build trust again, or decide that it is just too painful and unhealthy for me to be in a relationship with someone who will likely numb himself away from the relationship at some future point, or who will blurt out something unnecessarily hurtful in the name of working on himself. There is so much good here that it's hard to let go. It feels like my work is building trust in myself and getting better at staying in my body and catching the tendency to panic and go into abandonment melange. Is it possible to heal in an anxious avoidant relationship? Is my CPTSD blinding me? All right, and that is from Katie. All right, Katie, I think I can help. This is like so much pencil stuff here. All right, Katie, put on a seatbelt. I feel like you're in denial and that you're rationalizing a whole bunch of stuff. Let's go through. I'll go over what you told me so I can just tell you what I was hearing here. He's often wonderful, okay? He knows how to apologize in a very satisfying way. That's just an interesting phrase that immediately makes me think of somebody manipulative. They know how to make you feel okay with their apology, but they don't actually make things okay. And then you went into a great amount of detail, and this is something that I tend to zero in on. You gave me so much detail about his inner state and the complicated psychological reasons why he treats you terribly, really, why it's not at all the kind of relationship that you want and it hurts you. I mean, you are working so hard to help him rationalize what he's doing. So you said, you get anxious, he gets avoidant. Okay, maybe you do have an anxious attachment style, and maybe that's why you're with a person who basically will never give you any kind of security. For 6 years, wow, that may be why, but I don't think an anxious response to these constant blows to your trust and safety, I don't think that's like some sort of attachment problem. I think that's just rational, but you keep going into denial. When you keep saying you go out of your body, you know what that is? You're dissociated. You can't face how you actually feel. You can't face the writing on the wall, the obvious facts going on here. So this might be hard to hear because I'm just going to say what I can see from the outside, all right? So more detail about him. He can't find words. He can't receive words. He dissociates. From there, he sometimes avoids what the feeling is underneath using fantasy. So I just have a red flag in when somebody, a partner, you in this case, instead of describing the behavior, you're really putting your effort into rationalizing the behavior. So from there, you're saying he sometimes avoids whatever the feeling is underneath the fantasy using porn, booze, and marijuana, okay? So avoiding whatever the feeling is. That's, whatever. He's using porn and weed and alcohol in such a way that what you're describing, I don't know him. He didn't tell me what the deal is. Lots of people look at porn and drink and use marijuana, but the way you're describing it is it just sounds like a slippery person. Personally, I wouldn't date somebody who uses porn. I know that angers people here, but I feel strongly about it. In my life, I dated people who were into it before, and I'll just tell you there's a categorical difference between people who are into it and people who either don't use it or have given it up and are working on staying present in real relationships. And it's a huge difference, and I just, would just like to put it out there for everybody. Consider this. It's so much better without porn. It is a dissociative tool. He avoids the feeling underneath. I don't know, maybe he just likes those things. Maybe he just does. This avoiding the feeling underneath just sounds like coddling some behavior that you don't like. And you think that you are not allowed to like it because all he's doing is trying to avoid a difficult feeling. I don't know, that's what it feels like to me. So then you said at some point when any one of those are active, as if they are active, it's like, no, he is active. Porn is not active. He's watching porn. He is smoking weed. He is drinking. So they are not active. He is active. So he's doing those things that make you uncomfortable. I fear his avoidance has taken over. I guess you could call it avoidance, but I just keep encouraging you. Just look at the behavior for what it is. Don't label it. Don't psychologize it. Just go, he bails on you emotionally. He's just not there. He would rather do these other things, and he's not there. Okay, this is where the language you're using feels particularly toxic for you. And you say, if I can approach with enough spaciousness and curiosity, naming observations without bringing in passions or judgments. You know what you're describing to me? Walking on eggshells, dissociating, completely abandoning your own gut feeling about the situation, your own emotions. Spaciousness, what is that, I know what this is jargon for polyamory or certain psychological viewpoints, that he has space to just do stuff that violates your sense of safety in the relationship and would just about anyone. And I know there's always people who are watching who are like, oh, you're so biased against polyamory. Yes, I am. I'm totally biased against it. For people with attachment wounds, it's a terrible idea. I really highly recommend monogamy, commitment, security, getting a safe relationship for you to heal in. And it's easier said than done to create that, but one way you can guarantee you're not going to have it is by dating people like this. Yeah, not having passion or judgments. Why would you not want passion or judgments? Your judgment means discernment, just discerning like, this isn't right. I'm not okay with this. That's what you're talking about. And like, has he complained to you? Like, he doesn't want that from you. Of course he doesn't. Nobody does. And you said, but when they occur, again, I've said this before, there's these signs in the big wilderness areas near me where it says, ticks occur. And it always cracks me up. It's like there are ticks and they will bite you and possibly give you Lyme disease is what they're really saying. But they're saying, ticks occur. And you're saying this terrible abandoning behavior, you know, of somebody who's behaving like a sex addict and checking out of the relationship, it occurs. It's like this outside force you feel, and I think addictions feel like that, but they're not coming from outside. They're coming from inside the person. But when they occur and he comes back to me, you put it in quotes, I can feel utterly helpless and hopeless, as you should. There's like this guy does not keep his promises to you. And I don't think there's a hopeful future here from what you're describing. So those are appropriate feelings. That's not like you're failing. That's not your attachment wound. That's you having a rational like, oh, wow, I'm not getting what I want here. And what you want, you're allowed to want. It's a perfectly good thing to want, which is somebody who doesn't do this stuff to you. So then you said, is that just my abandonment stuff to work on? No, it's not. It's your dissociation from the truth of how you feel, trying to rationalize and make it work so you can keep this relationship with somebody who makes you very unhappy and insecure. And the good times, I believe you that there are good times. Even in like violent relationships, it's hard to leave. People have struggled to leave those relationships because they go, but the good times. And so, you know, it seems like a lot of relationships have good times, but how the bad times are have to be taken into account on whether you can be happy. And I noticed that you guys have been together 6.5 years. So this relationship is not settling, you know, it's kind of just, this is what it is what it is. And you could accept it if you want to. And I hear you just like working overtime, trying to make yourself accept it and act like, oh, I just have like an attachment wound. It's my abandonment stuff. It is not your abandonment stuff. It's not your abandonment stuff. And it's just interesting because the really harsh stuff that he did to you came later as like a background story. So you said he recently acknowledged that without realizing it, he plays the rescuer as he shows up beautifully. And I'm just like, no, he's not rescuing you. That's a pose and a fantasy maybe on your part that somebody rescues you, and that he has a hard time staying connected to his true desires from moment to moment because he fears losing me. I don't believe it. It sounds good. True desires, fear, rescue, I don't know. To me, those are all red flag concepts. A good relationship is one where somebody just like totally shows up for you. They get you, they listen to you, they kind of know what would be hard for you, and they try to make life good for you instead. And they want you to be happy, and they want to be the person who sets up life so that it supports you and so that you feel safe, like reasonably safe. Your expectations of safety. I mean, this relationship is so not safe. It's so slippery. So, you get to expect safety, but you don't stand up for it for yourself. You're clinging to a relationship that is anything but safe. So anyway, it's more of this like detail on his psychologizing how he doesn't show up for you, how he's not reliable for you, how he's deceived you at times. You said, but the not staying true to himself adds to his sense of overwhelm because he loses touch with how to express himself, and he starts not wanting to be with me and amplifying the numbing behaviors. Yeah, so he sounds pretty triggery, maybe emotionally immature, sex addict. I don't know. That's what I'm getting from the overall story here. He's working on it. Is he? I don't know. Is it changing? No. He's practicing saying what might be hard for me to hear. Well, I just want to reframe that and go, he often says what hurts you to hear. That's practicing? I don't know. I guess you're trying to say that he's not hiding, he's not lying to you, he's saying what hurts. So I see and feel him leaning in our connection, and he goes to therapy, but I'm not sure where my boundary is. Aha, there you go. Now this is one place in the letter where you're focusing on a problem that you have. You're not sure where your boundary is. And when I put boundaries up to avoid being, what's the boundary you're wondering, and when are you putting up boundaries to avoid being with what's true? I think you're doing a lot of things to avoid being with what's true. And the boundary, okay, so then what you're leading up to is you say, for example, I set a boundary that he not tell me about his fantasies or his ex. Yeah, of course. Please, unless he has decided to actually leave me, I don't want to hear about things that bring up my fear that he's leaving. Okay, so you don't want to hear it because you don't want that to be the reality. So the fact that he can't be this guy for you who doesn't just want to tell you about all his sexual exploits, even though he knows it makes you feel bad, I don't like this guy. I don't think that's good at all. I think that's incredibly, deeply inconsiderate. And if he needs that, he should not be with you. And you having just quite ordinary needs to just like not want to hear these things, which most people don't, that's a perfectly okay thing for you to want and have. And you can have that, but not with him. Not with him. He does not care that that hurts you. He feels hurt that I don't accept all of him. Yeah, I know. That's the deal with other people. We don't rage at them. We don't hit them. We might feel rageful. We might feel desperate and stuff, but we don't. We don't do that. We don't get to be all of us. We use restraint. We use consideration. We follow guidelines of the commitment of the relationship. And it sounds like you don't really have that here. You're just kind of keeping it undefined. I don't know, but it's not working for you. It's not working for you. So he says he just wants to tell me about whatever the fantasies are, not act them out, but to express them instead of hiding them. Fair enough, but wrong person. You've said you don't like it. am doing a lot of work on myself, soothing the part of me that gets scared when he starts to withdraw or when he has a fantasy. This is where you scare me, okay? This is where I work on yourself, soothing. No, suppressing, dissociating from. Sure, we've all done it. You're trying to be cool, girl, here. You've done a lot of work on yourself to suppress the feelings of fear when he starts to withdraw and go into fantasy. Because, come on, you know where it's leading, right? You know. Sometimes I let him deal with not getting to tell me everything. Sometimes I invite him to share when I feel resourced or curious. Those words were kind of alarming me too. They sound so good, so therapy-ish, but I feel resourced and curious. So you ask him about the fantasies that crush you, that hurt you. You said it helps when I initiate so that it doesn't feel like he drops a bomb on me. Dear me. And he doesn't feel like he has to hide some unlovable part about himself. You're not obliged to love somebody's vices. That's what it is. Like escaping with drugs and alcohol and porn, it's a vice. And you don't have to love that. I don't know. Then you say, important backstory. And it's very important. And it's interesting that it comes back here. About 1.5 years into the relationship, he moved to the town. Then he had to go back to his ex and see if she was still in love with him. Big red flag. It's not a red flag, it's a deal killer. It is. And it's red flag is a warning. But this is he actually had to go back to his ex and see if she was still in love with him. So you broke up with him, I get it. And he moved on quickly with other women in your circle, thinking that we would eventually get back together again and he would never be able to have sex with anyone again. That is such a sex addict thought. That is a sex addict thought. Well, I will eventually get back together, so I better go out and sleep with all her friends because I'll never have a chance again. Yeah, that's an addict thought. So he had to act on the opportunity. And ouch, you say. Yeah, worse than ouch. And you say, though I didn't appreciate those experiences, when COVID came, you went back to him and you wanted to put it together. And you said, you get through COVID and see where things were. Okay, so you gave it another chance. But here you are, right? Here you are. And then you said this summer was very busy and he was more avoidant than you would prefer. I don't know what you mean by avoidant, but I assume he's just not showing up for you as an emotionally connected person, supporting you, caring about what you want in the relationship, right? But I felt stronger in my sense of trust that we'd work it out, and I didn't need to and couldn't control what's happening. You can't control what's happening. You don't need to control what's happening, but you have to decide what you will accept. So if you accept this behavior and it's fine with you and you're happy with it, this could work. He's getting everything he wants. But are you? And I don't think you're happy. This is, you're struggling, you're attacking yourself, you're dissociating from your own feelings and, your awareness of what's really happening to make it work. And you're putting a lot of effort into understanding him. And what's really, really missing here is a lot of understanding of yourself. I'm not hearing it. You've kind of left yourself to try. I know, you know what? I've done it. We've all done it. And I know, but it is a very unhappy state. And when it ends, because it can't really last, you know, when it ends, it's a bereft and empty feeling. You know, so much time went by where you were trying so hard to build something when you could have been building something with somebody who wanted to build something. There's the difference, right? This is somebody who, he kind of wants a girlfriend while he does what he does. Then he announced he's not in love with you, and that was a huge trigger for me. It's not a trigger, it's another deal killer. He's not in love with you, so he's not boyfriend material. He's had time to be in love with you. It hurt, yeah, it hurt. It's so sad. It's like the saddest thing in the world when you're in love with somebody and they're not in love with you. It's horrible. It's horrible, but there's nothing for it, is there? There's nothing that can be done except to move on. And you said, I jumped to the conclusion that it meant he didn't want to be with me. No, you didn't jump to a conclusion. That is logical, and it does mean that. When you say that, I jumped to a conclusion, I feel like you're repeating lines that were put in your mind and your mouth from somebody trying to rationalize, just because I'm not in love with you, I didn't say I don't want to be with you. No, this feels so yucky, Katie. It just feels so yucky. I don't want you to have this. So then you said, when I finally got back into my body, yeah, if his behavior like causes you to dissociate and freak out that much that you leave your body, just saying, you know, that's not the idea. That's not love. And then you said you went to learn more about what he meant. So yeah, we always want to wish when we get our heart broken, maybe there's an explanation. Maybe I can crap fit myself to this. Do you know my word crap fit? Where you fit yourself to an unacceptable situation or an unacceptable person because you can't bear the drama, the pain of leaving the relationship. Like it becomes unthinkable for people with trauma wounds sometimes. But it's still doable. And sometimes when they leave, it's like, yes, we get through it. We do, but it just seems unthinkable to do. So there you are, you're crap fitting. And things have felt better, though, with hesitation on my part. Yeah, good. Listen to the hesitation, Katie. That's right. He now tells me that being in love is a fantasy state. No, it's not. It's not a fantasy state. Me and like millions of others in the world are here to say, no, it's a real thing. And it's a prerequisite for a romantic relationship. Many people go into loveless relationships or polyamorous, you know, I don't know, there's so many ways you could do this, right? But it's not a fantasy state. Being in love is a real thing, and it's what bonds people together and makes it possible to stay for the long term. If he's not in love with you, I mean, he is so grooming you to go have sex with other people. I'm sorry, I just hear that over and over again, and it's working because you're explaining it away. You're leaving your body to not face it, you know. You said it's a fantasy state that while he longs for it, he recognizes that truer love is not as passionate and sexy. Well, longer term love is not as passionate and sexy, but it's very, deep and valuable. And he wants to be with you. Okay, but I'm not hearing fidelity in the future here. I feel us back in the zone where he is communicating his care and open, available to work on things. Working on things is good when you're actually working towards the same thing. But you've abandoned what it is you want. So you're working towards what he wants. And it's working. He's getting what he wants. It took a lot of work to build trust after he left to explore sex in other places. All right, well, fair enough. You broke up with him because of that, because he went to his ex. Yeah. So it took a lot of work to build trust. Yeah. And you say, now I can choose to trust and build trust again. You can choose to kid yourself that this is a trustworthy relationship. But as I've said over and over again, I'm not hearing that it is. Don't kid yourself. I just don't gaslight yourself into believing that if you could just suppress your emotions enough, you know, this would turn out to be this lovely thing. I don't think so. If you could suppress your emotions enough, you can stay with him while he pursues other women, which, I mean, I just get the feeling like it's already happening and always has been. I can choose to trust and build again, or decide that it's just too painful and unhealthy for me to be in a relationship with someone who will likely numb himself away from the relationship at some future point, or who will blurt out something unnecessarily hurtful in the name of working on himself. I think you've got it there. You've really softened, you changed all the language to make it so, you know, he will numb himself out. You mean cheat on you, drink, use booze, you know, use porn, just like abandon reality and you for this fantasy and this addictive behavior. I just encourage you, try to like catch yourself using this fancy language to try to explain away what he's doing, and just call it what it is. Just call it what it is so that you can respond to it authentically. You can cry and just take that gut punch of like, oh, it is not the relationship that you want. It is not. Or he'll blurt out something unnecessarily hurtful in the name of working on himself. Yeah, that's bullshit. I'm sorry. And I also would say unnecessarily hurtful. In a way, I think it's necessary for him to say things like, I'm not in love with you. That's necessarily hurtful. It's good he said that because now you know. If he had avoided saying that to you, don't imagine that then there would be no problem. You wouldn't have pain because he wouldn't have told you what you already feel in your gut. You feel it. I keep hearing that. It just keeps peeking through the clouds. It's like, but wait, this is unhealthy. But wait. And then, yeah, it is unhealthy. And then you said there's so much good here, and there always is, even with the worst relationships, that it's hard to let go. It is hard. It's hard to go decide to be alone instead of with somebody, even if, I just want to remind you that sometimes leaving the crap relationship, it's just, there's this good, clean, open feeling, just like, just out, no longer compromising your integrity, no longer kidding yourself, no longer having to work so hard to not face what's really happening. It's just peace and clarity. And often from that place, like all kinds of good things can come into your life, including a proper relationship with somebody who shares the common goal to be, faithful to each other. It feels like my work is building trust in myself and getting better at staying in my body and catching the tendency to panic and go into abandonment melange. The first two, yes. Learn to trust in yourself, not him. Get better at staying in your body, meaning real, present, not abandoning and going into a justification and fantasy. And then when you say catching the tendency to panic and go into abandonment melange, yes, abandonment melange is like a very intense emotional reaction to abandonment. But honey, you've been abandoned. You are being abandoned every day. So it's natural to feel abandoned. It does not feel good. And there's no amount of stuffing the feeling down that's going to make that feel better. So you said, is it possible to heal in an anxious avoidant relationship? Yes, it is possible to heal in an anxious avoidant relationship. But I don't think what you're talking about here is an anxious avoidant relationship. I think it's you're in a relationship with a sex addict. And so avoidant, maybe, I think by definition, people who are in addiction are avoidant because if people know that what they're doing, they interfere with what they're trying to do. And I know from bitter experience what this is like. So anxious avoidant would be, one person tends to be uncomfortable with closeness, but they don't go cheat. That's a different thing. That may be where somebody who's avoidant goes, but they don't lie, they don't cheat, they don't gaslight. That's a different thing. So avoidant means it's uncomfortable, they're slow, they need a lot of space and time, not too much pressure to get close. They can't take a whole bunch of talking about feelings all the time, but sometimes. But here's the thing about an avoidant. They meet you halfway. They know that you're working extra to be okay with them being kind of avoidant, but they're working extra to give you the reassurance. So that, you're talking about some of the language and things he said that were that, but they're nullified by the behaviors. That's the deal. So they feel like manipulation to me. So in fact, I want to leave, for anybody who's watching this, I want to leave you with a download that I have. It's free, and it's called Signs of Romantic Manipulation. It can help you spot this in advance so you don't end up emotionally attached to such a person.